people had positive reactions to their training. So what I ended up doing is having these major categories: positive, which I'll show here, and what I just mentioned is 96% had a positive outcome for their quality assurance training. One person was not sure, and I'll talk about that. And then there were a few criticisms, and sort of jumping ahead, these criticisms were not actually about their quality assurance training. When I broke down the categories of what people were most happy with, ended up with 6, and I've listed them here. So course organization, alignment, accessibility, student benefits, the use of other rubrics, and then special mention of the eSpecialists. And what I want to do in the following slides is to go through sort of each one of these categories and just talk a little bit about it. I think we've got about 25 minutes, so I don't want to spend too much time here. I mentioned this before, 96% stated their QA training was helpful. And looking back at the data from the year before on the quantitative aspect, most faculty were taking QM training. So there was some cold, and very few people were taking OLC, as I mentioned before. This corresponded nicely to a survey that was also taken CSU-wide last year, and faculty were asked about their QA training and how it affected their teaching effectiveness. And as you can see here, 74% thought it was very useful, and 25 or 24.5 somewhat useful. Add those together and you get 96.6% found their QA training very useful or somewhat useful, and the rest said it was not useful. So the results came out fairly close to the whole California State University system, which has 23 campuses. Okay, in terms of what faculty found most useful was in their quality assurance training was course organization. And what they ended up saying is, I didn't write everything down that they ended up saying, but in terms of what they like most, they gave a list, and the things that kept coming up were creating videos in terms of introductory videos, so faculty introductions to students, creating a start here area. Faculty really like that. Help with making their syllabi better in terms of course organization, because your syllabi is sort of reflected in your course. And then of course, having better navigation throughout the course. And other research has certainly shown similar examples. And we know that course design is important to student success, and it certainly takes a lot of time to do this, but it seems like their quality assurance training they're receiving is really paying off in terms of people really liking this. Alignment was the second most common category mentioned in terms of what they were happy with in terms of their training. This is interesting because, as we just heard this morning where Melody was talking about, alignment is not an easy thing to do. It's sometimes not an easy thing to understand, but it's one of those things that I think makes a massive amount of difference when you finally train faculty in terms of what is alignment. So you're creating good course learning outcomes, module learning outcomes, and everything in the course is connected. And I've mentioned this before, other research has shown this to be the case, where faculty are surveyed about, what's the most important thing about their own quality assurance training. And in some studies, the alignment has been like the main benefit, especially using Quality Matters, the Quality Matters rubric. It's also interesting too, if you read through the research, there was a study done in 2018, and it also said that, learning about alignment was very important, but it also said it was one of the most controversial parts of using the QM rubric. And it was controversial in that training faculty to understand alignment really revealed that a lot of faculty, or some faculty, didn't realize it was connected to student learning. So I thought that was really interesting. And if you're a peer reviewer or a master reviewer, that you have to spend quite a bit of time now making sure the learning outcomes are all connected to the module learning outcomes, to the assessments, and so on. So I was pretty happy to see that. In terms of the third category was accessibility. Um, this I was really happy to see. Again, if you've gone through, being a peer reviewer or master reviewer, you know that accessibility seems to be one of those difficult categories for faculty to work on. And I think it's the one where they probably get the most frustrated with as well. We know as we're putting our courses together that, these days they can't be totally text-based or video-based without some mechanism to include all students in this. And I think Quality Matters does a really good job in terms of explaining accessibility. And the most recent edition of the rubric really makes great strides. And I think in terms of making every aspect of the course accessible. And of course, we know that, it's much easier to know about accessibility first and how to incorporate that into a course before you get started. Because if you have a course and you have to make it accessible afterwards, it's much more difficult, much more time consuming. The fourth category that ended up coming up was student benefits. So 15% of the faculty had mentioned that. And again, here, what I've done is listed a few of their comments. So in terms of using their quality assurance training, their courses become more engaging. So the students are engaged more within the course material, with the faculty, with their peers. Students too, a few faculty had mentioned specifically that students notice that their courses are more organized. And this will come up later when I talk about sort of closing the loop aspects of some of this research, what can be done. But they're noticing more organization. So it'd be interesting to do a study comparing non-QM courses to QM courses to see if students actually are noticing this organization or not. The next section that came up, which was kind of interesting, 8% of the faculty mentioned the use of other rubrics. Now, what they ended up not doing, which is kind of too bad, is that they didn't provide any details why they thought the use of other rubrics. But I guess to me, it sort of made sense that they're using a rubric to put their course together. They notice how good the rubric is, and so therefore they realize they can use other rubrics in other parts of their courses. So that seems to be a common thing that faculty seem to be doing here. Another category that came up was, and I've just titled it here, special mention of eSpecialists. 8% of the faculty had specifically mentioned their eSpecialists, or the instructional designers that are helping them go through the QM process. I do want to mention here specifically that this overwhelming positive response to the quality assurance training that they've received is directly related to those eSpecialists. So this whole project is sort of sitting on those people's shoulders who work with these faculty. And the results that came out is 96% of faculty that answered this survey were extremely happy with the training that they received from these eSpecialists. And I got a little quote here from the Clory report, quote, institutions that require institutional design input or rely on course design teams see greater student engagement with faculty and other students. And I think we're seeing this in this research and of course in other research as well. Faculty also mentioned that it was nice to have the course reviewed before going through the entire QM peer review process. So they really like that. And I do want to mention here too, since we're talking about the eSpecialists, at East Bay, there are numerous funding opportunities for faculty to go through the QM review process. So, and they all get assigned to an eSpecialist. So this is where this result is coming from. Okay, so 96% found their training very helpful. 4%, really one person, wasn't sure. And I thought this was interesting. I wasn't quite sure if I wanted to put this into the data, but since it was part of it, it needed to be in there. So they answered it wasn't, they weren't sure if it was helpful because they hadn't taught online yet. And I did put a little quote here. They haven't taught online yet, but they quote, "Online hybrid courses are terrible teaching experiences." So they haven't taught online yet. This is what they feel. And I'm really hoping, I didn't collect any personal data from this particular study, but I'm hoping this person who wrote that will have a very different view once they actually start designing their course and teaching online. Because I found too that people who tend not to teach online or don't want to teach online have this view that teaching online is sort of this terrible like teaching experience, which of course isn't really the case. Okay, criticisms. So what I found is that people had some complaints within my survey, but they were unrelated to the QA training that they received. So I thought that was a good thing. What some faculty noted is that student evaluations were the same or slightly lower in their courses. And I think what they were expecting is that they go through the whole QM process, making their courses better. And they were hoping that the student evaluations would reflect that. And that, what a couple of people have noted, didn't happen for them. So part of the reason for that is other faculty had mentioned the courses seem more difficult. So when they compare the course before it went through the QM process and compared it afterwards, it seemed more difficult for students. And that corresponds really interestingly to some research that was done at our university in, let's see, it must have been 2017, 2018. And I was partly involved with some of this where we looked at the grades of students who went through a class that was where the faculty had quality assurance training and compared it to online classes where the faculty did not. Now, what we ended up seeing there, and I think right now probably Roger Wen and Eric Kong are talking about this in another room, is that what they saw is that the number of A grades actually went down in the QM courses, while the number of Bs went up. And I didn't write this down here, I probably should have. The number of Ds, the number of Fs, and the number of Ws, sort of unauthorized withdrawal, also went down in QM courses. So that was a really good trend. So maybe these courses really are more difficult because there's many more things that people have to concentrate on in terms of designing their courses, and then students are picking up on that in their evaluations. But in general, I think it seems to be working in terms of reducing the number of students who are actually failing. Okay, so in terms of what I think should come out of this, so I'm just calling this closing the loop, or recommendations based on this research. I think what needs to happen is that more quality assurance training needs to be offered. And this should be both lecturers and tenure track faculty. Right now at East Bay, we've got training for certainly all the tenure track people, but we really need to work more on getting the lecturers in because, as most of us know, lecturers are teaching most of our classes. So they need to be offered to all faculty. The second point is, start offering some course development training to in-class faculty, and then introduce them to these QM or the COLT rubrics, whatever rubric universities are using, because we're seeing, and this is shown in other research, that faculty are happy with the QA training that they're receiving. So I think it'd be useful to introduce this to all faculty, maybe during faculty review week or at the very beginning of the semester. I don't know if this is going on, but I think there should be a rubric like QM or COLT for in-class courses. And this, and some of these are sort of tied together, where I think faculty are really enjoying their quality assurance training and it's working in their classes, it seems like a natural progression to move into in-class courses with something like this. Number 4, I think there should be more workshops on creating alignment maps and making courses accessible both for online and in-class faculty. I know we've got a few instructional designers at our university and they're working like mad right now because, you know, of what we're all going through. But I think with alignment being an extremely important part of course design, it seems like it would be useful for everyone, both online and in-class faculty, to have some type of training on that. Number 5, now this one sort of comes out of my own experience. So I think that we should be making course design, quality assurance training mandatory for MA, MS, PhD students who plan on teaching. Now, that's probably most students. What I've been doing in our MA program, especially we've got 4 options for MA students. One is teaching. Anybody who comes through me as an advisor in the teaching option must go through sort of this sort of reduced QM rubric process. And they have to design part of their teaching course online or all online. If I'm happy if they want to do that. But I think this is really important to start people off really early in their careers, their teaching careers, on some type of quality assurance training. 6, so a couple of comments that came out of the research is that they felt like students should be introduced to the QM rubric. So make the QM rubric available to students so they can see what faculty are doing in terms of creating their courses. And I tend to mention in my courses, like, I've used this rubric, I've got this training, and here's how the course is designed based on that. I think students probably have a more positive experience in a class if they know that, you know, you spent some time actually designing your class and spent quite a bit of time doing that. Now, all this comes down to number 7, we need to hire more e-learning specialists. This has been pretty clear, especially now where, like I said, at our university, we've got a few, and they're now trying to train all faculty on doing something online to keep the classes going. But I think looking at this research, I know our e-learning specialists are working like crazy. And I think if we just had more of them to spread the work out, I think that'd be a really good thing. Number 8 is sort of a wish that what I'd like to do at some point, and I mentioned this at the very beginning, doing some type of comparison in terms of student evaluations for online courses with QA training faculty versus non-QA training faculty to see if students are actually noticing the difference. Now, I realize there are issues with student evaluations and, you know, what goes into all of these, but I would really like to know what students are feeling as they go through these classes. And let me just check the time. Hold on 1 second. Okay, I see I've gone a little over. I think we've got a few minutes for questions. Let me stop my share.
You do have just a few minutes for questions, Kevin. We're okay.
Okay, good.
We're scheduled till 12:20, so.
Okay, good.
Yeah, 12:20. So you've got a couple minutes. Go ahead. Do you want me to read the questions to you that are on the Q&A, or?
Sure.
This one was at the very beginning, and she says, "Are they trained to do so?" And I'm not sure what that was in reference to. It was at the very beginning of the session. So
okay.
Maybe. Zachariah, if you could elaborate on that, what you meant, are they trained, what it was they were trained to do, and then we can go on to the next question while you're doing that. It would be great if we could share the actual survey questions.
Okay, I did that at the beginning. I only sent out 1 question. It's probably on the 2nd or 3rd slide. Yeah, so it's up there.
Okay. Are student evaluation forms different for online courses versus face-to-face courses?
No, they're exactly the same at our university. exactly the same.
Okay. And what do you think about applying QREM rubric to face-to-face courses and training faculty that way?
I think it should be done. So I mentioned that in my sort of closing the loop. I think that it'd be extremely helpful for this. And I sent out, when we went to all online about 3 weeks ago, where faculty had no clue what online teaching was, I sent them a version of the QM rubric and told them just, you know, you're being thrown into this, just be careful, but here's a useful tool you can use to help your courses better. And I think if it's used, I'm hoping that what they'll end up doing when we go back to face is they use some of those things that they're learning from the rubric.
Okay. That looks like it on the questions. Thank you everyone for joining us. I placed the link to the evaluation in the chat for you, so please, we encourage you to share your feedback about the session there so that we can continue to offer some wonderful sessions for you. Have a good lunch, and we'll see you all this afternoon.
All right, thanks everybody. All right, thanks Nancy.
Thank you, Kevin. Great.
All right, I'll talk to you soon.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.